Good evening and welcome to Choral Hall. Thank you for joining us for Luke Tyler's Doctor of Arts lecture recital. As a courtesy to performers and other audience members, we ask that you take a moment and please turn off all cell phones and other personal communication devices. As a reminder, there is to be no food or drink in the hall, as well as no flash photography throughout the performance. If you must leave during the performance, please do so during applause. Thank you and enjoy the performance.
Thank you for coming. Sergei Prokofiev is one of the most notable composers of post-impressionistic piano music. All of his piano sonatas remain in the canon of concertized works, as do most of his short pieces, such as the toccata, sarcasms, and other sets. Prokofiev has another genre of solo piano works that are less famous, but no less well-crafted, his piano transcriptions. Prokofiev transcribed his own works for solo piano, including selections from his ballet Cinderella and his operas A Love of Three Oranges and War and Peace. The most famous and frequently played of his transcriptions are those from his ballet Romeo and Juliet. The music from this ballet contains many iconic themes in 20th century classical music, including selections like Montagues and Capulets, Masks, and Mercutio. This work comes during a unique period in Prokofiev's output, where he favored programmatic genre like film and ballet to the larger symphonic and sonata-type works for which he is more famous. In this period, Prokofiev simplified his style to highlight melody instead of brutality and consonance instead of dissonance. And when he did exhibit his harsher style, he could do so under the guise of programmatic description. Prokofiev called this stylistic change a new simplicity. Through the Romeo and Juliet piano transcriptions, I look to illustrate these stylistic changes while demonstrating Prokofiev's 5 lines in order to gain a better understanding of how Prokofiev's simpler style compares to the hallmark compositions of his pianistic output. Prokofiev's style is often described as having 5 specific style traits, or lines as he described them. These lines include lyrical, neoclassical, toccata, modern, and grotesque. I will illustrate the evolution of these lines in 2 ways. The first through the traditional canon of Prokofiev's music, and the second through Romeo and Juliet. The point of this exercise is to show the raw essence of each line and how they changed in a new simplicity. Please be aware the use of these traits are fluid. A piece is never comprised of a single style trait. As I proceed, please reference the handout provided for short descriptions of each stylistic trait and how they were used in each movement I will play. Prokofiev said that his lyricism appears first as a thoughtful and meditative mood, not always associated with the melody. This meditative mood is often manifested in lyrical, polyphonic textures that are orchestral in nature. When Prokofiev uses a lyrical melody, contrapuntal, heavily chromatic lines typically accompany them. This example from the first movement of Prokofiev's 7th piano sonata illustrates his use of lyricism. In the second theme of the sonata, Prokofiev sets a melancholy, meditative mood. Note the chromatic angularity of the melodic line and polyphonic treatment, resulting in a complex texture. I will now play example 1, lyricism in the second theme of Prokofiev's 7th piano sonata. Prokofiev's neoclassical element is found in his use of traditional forms, ornamentations, and motivic gestures that refer to the composition of previous musical eras. Taken from his love of Beethoven sonatas, Prokofiev typically composed in traditional formal structures, including sonatas, ternary dances, binary, and through composed forms. This clear use of form is ubiquitous in his compositional output. Therefore, it will be unnecessary to demonstrate this at this time. He also uses traditional musical gestures, many of which are best exemplified in Romeo and Juliet. Frequent use of scales, turns, and other ornaments illustrate his admiration for previous composers like Bach and Beethoven. Prokofiev's Opus 12 exemplifies his appreciation for previous composers. It contains 10 pieces, all of which are traditional dance movements, including a gavotte, rigodon, and march, among many other movements. The prelude from Opus 12 illustrates the neoclassical trait well. The right hand plays a fast Alberti-type accompaniment, while the left is playing parallel thirds. In his use of the neoclassical, Prokofiev often favors C major, a popular key in the early classical era, which is exemplified in this piece. The harmonies in the opening of this piece are primarily diatonic. Notice the circle of fifths progression at the end of the example, an idiomatic musical device of the Baroque and classical eras. Be aware that the neoclassical trait of Prokofiev is rarely demonstrated in a manner as consonant as this example. In fact, the middle section of this work, which I will not be playing, is quite dissonant. I will now play example 2, Neoclassicism illustrated in Prokofiev's Opus 12 Prelude. Pervasive in Prokofiev's music. Developed from his admiration for the Schumann toccata, this element of his style can be seen in a churning, mechanical character often found in his accompaniments and textures. In his traditional style, this use of motor can often comprise the majority of the texture, including the theme. The finale of the 7th Piano Sonata, in 7/8 meter with noticeable accents, serves as a perfect example. Listen for the dry, mechanical octaves and chords in both hands, creating a texture that is comprised of constant 8th note chords. Note the left-hand ostinato that contains a particularly machine-like accent found on the offbeats. I will now play example 3, the opening of the 3rd movement of Prokofiev's 7th Piano Sonata. Prokofiev refers to the modern element as the crudeness of his harmonies that developed later into a language in which to express powerful emotions through new departures in melody, orchestration, and drama. The modern element of Prokofiev's music is illustrated by the use of harsh dissonances, chromatic harmonies, and angular chromatic accompaniment patterns that create dissonances with the melody. which was demonstrated in the earlier example illustrating lyricism. While Prokofiev's music is not atonal, it does contain passages of extreme chromaticism. Perhaps one of the most interesting works using the modern line is the Diabolical Suggestion, Opus 4, number 4. This work is known for its harsh, crude harmonies and biting angular themes. Based purely on harmonic content, this piece can be very jarring. Listen for the minor ninths in the left hand accompanied by clusters of chords in the right hand. Also listen for Prokofiev's use of chromatic scales and figures. I will now play example 4, a recording of a section of the Diabolical Suggestion. Prokofiev described the characteristics of his grotesque line as whimsicality, laughter, and mockery, all of which are present frequently in his music. Grotesque refers specifically to distortion and mockery of expected musical events. A good example is when we hear Haydnesque ornaments that are distorted through dissonance and angularity to create a jarring effect. These include distortion to melodies, rumbling low bass notes, flippant rhythmic figures, and loud percussive chords. As you most surely observed from the previous piece, the grotesque and modern line can be very difficult to differentiate. However, the grotesque line refers specifically to the use of gesture, while the modern element refers to chromatic harmonies and dissonances. Few of Prokofiev's works typify the use of disturbing gesture better than his Sarcasms, Opus 17. This work, which exemplifies the enfant terrible image, is one of the most harsh, angry works in Prokofiev's music. The first sarcasm illustrates this with its loud, taunting opening gesture that features a repeated melodic tritone. Notice the harsh chords and the angular, distorted melodic lines. The articulations are particularly percussive at times, utilizing brutal accents throughout the melodic line. Notice the quick, flippant, and trill-like rhythmic gestures that also typify the grotesque. I will now play example 5, the opening of Prokofiev's Sarcasm, number 1. As you may have noticed from the examples, these 5 traits are generally not presented individually, absent from the other 4. The traits are, with little exception, present at all times in Prokofiev's music in varying proportions. The conglomerate of these traits is what makes Prokofiev's style unique and recognizable from Bartók, Shostakovich, and other composers. In the 1930s, Prokofiev's style dramatically changed to become more accessible and consonant. Prokofiev called this change in style a new simplicity. The simpler style is typified by an increased use of homophony, emphasis on emotion and melody, decreased dissonance, a preference for programmatic genre, avoidance of the avant-garde and expressionism, and an emulation of techniques of classical Russian composers like Mussorgsky and Tchaikovsky. Overall, Prokofiev seemed to temper the traits that led him to be viewed as an enfant terrible, a composer whose music was viciously crude. His simpler style lent itself better to programmatic music, including ballet, film, and children's works. In fact, many of Prokofiev's most famous works come from this period: Peter and the Wolf, Lieutenant Kijé, Alexander Nevsky, and Romeo and Juliet. This change in style seemed to come from a number of factors. Prokofiev, who spent a great portion of his life in Paris, thought unfavorably of the increasingly complex and chromatic music of Parisian composers. Another factor came from the negative critical reviews of Prokofiev's music in the 1920s. Many critics believed Prokofiev would never reach musical maturity, relying instead on shock value and brutal music. Perhaps the most substantial influence on Prokofiev's style came from his desire to become an iconic, nationalistic Russian composer. In doing so, he needed to comply with the Soviet government's regulations on artistic style and genre in a movement called Soviet realism. Regardless the reason, Prokofiev's style became melodically driven, reducing harshness while maintaining enough of his original style to create some of his most iconic works. It is important to remember that this new simplicity made Prokofiev's style simpler, not simple. Sections of chromaticism, percussive brutality, complex textures, and angularity can still be seen in this music. However, this music is more accessible on the whole. Due to difficulties in staging the ballet Romeo and Juliet, Prokofiev created 2 of the 3 orchestral suites, followed quickly by transcriptions of 10 movements for solo piano. This occurred for many reasons, ranging from discord with the dancers to suppression by the Soviet government. The set includes various character depictions, dances, including a lengthy overture, incidental music, and scenes from the ballet. In the ballet, each musical theme serves as a leitmotif that is developed and changed in any number of ways. The implication of this is that the thematic material in the piano transcriptions is rarely taken directly from the music of the ballet. For example, the final codetta of Juliet, the Young Girl, does not occur until the 3rd act of the ballet, although the other themes are introduced far earlier. I will be playing 5 of the 10 piano transcriptions. These contain the most familiar themes in Romeo and Juliet and are representative of Prokofiev's style in the new simplicity. These selections are Juliet as a Young Girl, Masks, Montagues and Capulets, Mercutio, and Romeo bids Juliet farewell. I will discuss each movement and illustrate Prokofiev's 5 lines as they appear. Notice the elements of the new simplicity in each. In particular, lyricism is frequently present. These cantabile themes in each piece are primarily treble-dominated with clear consonant accompaniments, thin textures, and a lack of harsh dissonances. In the ballet, these lyrical lines are nearly always used to accompany Juliet. The neoclassical element can be seen in many movements of Prokofiev's, with Prokofiev's use of ornamentation, scalar motives, and clear forms. The modern line can be seen frequently in non-diatonic progressions and chromatic cadences. In the selections I will play, listen for these chromatic cadences, most of which completely avoid a perfect authentic cadence in favor of unexpected, highly chromatic variants. Juliet, as a young girl, portrays the adolescent, multifaceted personality of the character by introducing and utilizing multiple themes. In the movement, her personality is illustrated in two ways: as Juliet, the innocent, playful child, then as Juliet, the blossoming young woman. The neoclassical element is evident in the opening rondo theme by Prokofiev's frequent use of major scales and triadic figures. The opening Mozartian theme, however, is harmonized based on mediant relationships rather than traditional harmonic grammar. I will play the theme first using traditional diatonic harmonies, then, as Prokofiev composed it, using the mediant relationships. The other themes illustrate different elements. The first contrasting theme uses the motor element through its rapid notes and its articulate staccato melody, using a neoclassical Alberti-style accompaniment. The other themes illustrate Prokofiev's use of lyricism in different ways. One is a cantabile theme that exemplifies the traits of the new simplicity through single-line trebled melody and lengthy phrasing. The second, a section that dramatically alters the tempo, provides a meditative mood and texture, including a short section of counterpoint. Note the ending section that serves as a short coda. This section alters one of the contrasting themes to provide a foreboding, serious ending to this otherwise playful piece. This coda parallels the ending of the entire work that can be seen in the final movement. I will now play example 6, Juliet as a young girl. Masks is the first of the ternary dance movements that seem to be inspired by the scherzo and trio. In the tradition of a new simplicity, Prokofiev uses a simple ABA structure, where the A themes are repeated with minimal alteration, and the B theme illustrates a clear change in texture, melody, character, and tempo. Masks depicts the masquerade where Romeo and Juliet first meet. Its haughty character demonstrates a courtly processional. Neoclassicism can be seen in the Baroque-like turns that comprise the initiating gesture of the primary theme. Prokofiev's use of the modern line begins with the introduction that consists of harmonic and melodic minor seconds. Listen to how the left hand's minor seconds are presented in numerous iterations against the stationary, dissonant minor seconds in the right hand. The modern line is further demonstrated by the A theme, which completely abandons diatonic function in favor of chromatic melody and harmony. The grotesque can be seen momentarily following the first iteration of the theme in a dissonant, accented, and brutally loud series of chords in both hands. I will now play example 7, Masks. Perhaps the most famous piece from Romeo and Juliet, Montagues and Capulets, depicts the tension between the two families. In the ballet, this insistent theme often accompanies Lord Capulet, a commanding, stubborn character. The outer sections of this ternary form contain a depiction of the grotesque element through the pesante articulation, low, rumbling bass notes, and overdotted melody. This melody is angular through its range, varied intervals, and jagged rhythm. This example of the grotesque is presented with limited influence of the modern element in its reduced use of chromaticism. This reinforces the fact that the modern and grotesque, though closely related, are two separate elements. Prokofiev's music does not need chromaticism to be grotesque. The middle section, in contrast with the outer sections, uses a motoric, clock-like articulation accompanying a lyrical legato melody. Like the other cantabile lines, this portrays Juliet in the ballet. I will now play example 8, Montagues and Capulets. Mercutio illustrates one of Shakespeare's most coarse, manic, and facetious characters. Prokofiev recreates this character through a mock-humorous, scherzo-like drive in the outer sections and a brooding, cynical trio, creating another ternary form with clear repetitions of the A section and a contrasting B section. The dark humor can be heard in the insistent melody, which contains a motoric drive that encapsulates the entire theme. Mercutio's manic personality can be seen in the various changes in articulation and displacement of the melody. The neoclassical element can be seen in the frequent use of scales and ornamental turns that pervade the melodic line. Momentary flashes of chromaticism and the angular theme that opens the movement demonstrate the modern element. The middle section also illustrates the grotesque character through its juxtaposition of dry articulations and cantabile scales, and the modern can be seen through chromatic flourishes in the middle of the texture. I will now play example 9, Mercutio. Romeo Bids Juliet Farewell contains thematic material that opens and closes the ballet and illustrates Romeo and Juliet's love. The entire movement is exemplary of Prokofiev's lyricism in A New Simplicity, containing numerous cantabile themes in varying textures. The innocence of the opening theme can be seen in its diatonicism, relaxed rhythm, and playful cadences. The accompaniment simply rocks and maintains the stillness. The use of tenuto at the cadences reaffirms the stillness of the rhythmic structure. This movement is very slow, building to an epic climax that illustrates heroism found frequently in Prokofiev's later works. The form is ambiguous, as Prokofiev uses a more narrative, rhapsodic approach to the piece. Prokofiev uses the modern line through quick and unexpected harmonic changes and chromatic lines in the contrapuntal accompaniment. The motor can be seen in the final section of the piece. Following the climax, a machine-like clock effect is achieved through slow, articulated chords that proceed uninhibited to the end of the piece. This section, foreshadowed by Juliet as a young girl, seems to illustrate the clock ticking on Romeo and Juliet's lives. Brief moments of heavy chromaticism interrupt the otherwise static harmonic movement. I will now play example 10, Romeo bids Juliet farewell. The time is past when music was written for a handful of aesthetes. Today, vast crowds of people have come face to face with serious music and are awaiting with eager impatience. Composers, take heed of this. If you repel these crowds, they will turn away from you to jazz or vulgar music. But if you can hold them, you will win an audience such as the world has never before seen.